Welcome back, everyone. Michael here with Offshore Citizen. There is a thing in Bulgarian tax rules that I have mentioned on a bunch of videos, and I often seem to get comments below the video about it, and it's when I reference the idea of 7.5% as opposed to 10% tax. I recently had to correct some accountants in Bulgaria on this, which is kind of disappointing. You would think you go to accountants to get good tax advice and that they would be able to help you. However, it seems most places around the world, people are not focused on trying to optimize and squeeze every drop of juice out for you, which is really quite shocking. You would think it's somebody's profession, but anyway, it is what it is. So this is why we have to dive in and discover these things for ourselves. So today I'm going to talk to you about how actually it's possible, not even just in some cases to get pretty much almost everyone should be able to get 7.5%. But you can actually get 6% in certain cases. And so actually it can go as low as 4%, but probably not for most people who are going to be watching these videos. So yeah, today we're going to talk about how you get 4 to 7.5% tax in Bulgaria. So let's dive in. Before we do, if you haven't already, please hit the subscribe button, hit the all notifications. Thank you for subscribing. Thank you for supporting our channel. Really appreciate your support. I'm working hard to grow this channel, so anything you can do to help, very much appreciate it. Very appreciate it. And if you would like help with the things that we deal with here, which is international tax optimization, forming companies, opening bank accounts, getting residencies and citizenships around the world, as well as all the related halo of things, please reach out to me. You can book a call, calendly.com/Michael-Rosmer. There's a link in the description below. And you can also send a message to our websites, offshorecitizen.net or offshorecapitalist.com. Okay, so here's the way that it goes. Normally, you have personal income tax rate, flat tax, 10% in Bulgaria. So most people are paying 10%. Okay. Additionally, if you're receiving dividend income, it's 5%. And it's pretty logical why this is, because the corporate tax rate is 10%. And so for most people who operate companies, their general assumption in Bulgaria is they're going to pay 14.5% tax, which is calculated by saying you have your full income, then you pay 10% corporate tax, leaving you with 90% left, then you pay 5% on the dividend, which is equal to 4.5% of the total. So that's how you get to 14.5%. And sometimes that's actually a better way to go than paying yourself a wage, because if you pay yourself a wage, you're going to have socials. And so if your income is low, the socials are going to represent a higher share of the overall. To give some context, Bulgarian socials are quite low. And it's not so much just that they're low, but they're also capped quite low. So in other words, if your income is high, it generally pays for you to give yourself a wage. If your income is low, it generally pays to pay yourself a dividend. Okay? That's normally the way that it works. However, in most cases, at least a lot of the people who I work with wouldn't be necessarily, like if you're an employee in Bulgaria, this is not likely to be the situation for you, but or it could be, but not usually. Most of our clients, you can get to 7.5% tax. And how is that? Well, in Bulgaria, there is a concept of being self-employed, okay? Now, very confusingly, there is also a concept of being a sole trader, okay? And so this is where some of the confusion comes in. So this is where I have accountants who will say to me, hang on a minute, I thought it was 15%. And I'm like, no. And then they go and check with the National Revenue Association and comes back and say, okay, you were right. So if you are operating as a sole trader, yes, it is 15%. And that's basically, so a sole trader is kind of like an unincorporated business. And in this situation, they're kind of assuming because the business's income is your income, they're adding the corporate tax rate plus the personal tax rate and leaving you with 15%. That's pretty much never the best way to go, because if you do that, you're in a situation where you don't get the deferral value that comes from the company, you don't get the liability protection that comes from the company, and you're in a situation where you actually lose that 0.5%. So generally, that's not a great way to go in Bulgaria. However, this is different from being self-employed. Okay, now please note, you can be self-employed without having a local business or with having a local business, etc. So you get into this whole thing of like how you should structure your business in order to facilitate and optimize this particular thing is a whole other conversation that we will not have in this video, but there is some structuring to do if you really want to maximize it, and I'll quickly explain that in a second. The way that it works is a self-employed person can get a deduction from their, so they have 10% tax, but they get a deduction of 25 to 60% off their regular tax rate. Okay? And the reason for this is pretty obvious. It's they assume that you're going to have a bunch of hard expenses, and because you're going to have a bunch of hard expenses, you need to account for that, right? Now, you don't have to provide receipts, you don't have to do anything. It's just automatically by nature of who you are. Now, the 25% is for pretty much anyone who's freelancing, okay? So professionals, people who are doing work, etc., this would be the 25% deduction, okay? The 60% deduction, which is going to apply to very few people here, is for agriculture. Okay, so people who are in the agriculture industry, you can get 60%. So you can do the math quickly, 10% less 60% is 4%. You end up with 4%. 4% is a very reasonable tax rate, right? I think almost nobody would complain about a 4% tax rate. Everybody can agree, okay, I'm using some services in this country, it's good. In fact, 7.5%, most people. In fact, a lot of people are quite okay with 10%. I generally find when I'm talking to people, say from Canada, they're often okay with the small business tax rate. It's when you start going up into the personal tax rates, you go from say 12% or something to 48%, that it becomes like, whoa, hang on a minute here. This is not so good. It's just not worth the relationship. And the ironic thing, of course, is that the more money you make, the higher your rate goes, and the less the ratio makes sense. At the lower ratio, your tax rate is lower, and what you're getting and what you're paying overall, it's like, okay, I'm getting health care, I'm getting education, I'm getting roads and security, and you can kind of make sense of $10,000, maybe $20,000 a year or something. But if you're making $500,000 or $1 million a year and you're paying half of that, you're like $500,000 for all this. I feel like I can get private insurance to cover my health care for about $1,000 a month. So it doesn't really make so much sense. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. So the situation for the middle group is if you have anyone who is an author or somebody who's getting licensing rights, or anything related to patents, okay, so they're like labor due to patents, then you can get a 40% reduction. So similar to how in Portugal, you can, as somebody who's earning royalties, you can get 0% tax if it's foreign royalties coming into Portugal. Again, you might have some withholding taxes abroad, so it doesn't necessarily make that much sense, but here, things to do with licensing, etc. And let's be fair, you can kind of rationalize certain things into that category. So some people may be able to massage that, so they end up at 6% tax in Bulgaria. Could be reasonable. Now, what's the downside of this? Well, the downside of this is, as I mentioned, they're assuming that, hey, you have some expenses, and that's kind of why they're giving you this deduction in most cases, sometimes a little bit of incentive as well. The problem is, well, you're not claiming deductions. So as compared with, say, having a business where you might deduct a huge percentage of your revenue as costs, you're not going to end up in the right scenario. This is where structuring comes in, because we want to be able to claim the deductions, plus at the same time we want to be able to claim this lower tax rate, and the combination leaves us at actually genuinely getting, say, a 7.5% or a 6% overall tax rate. So that's the way it works. If you have any questions, you can definitely let me know. Put them in the comments below, or reach out, book a call, send us a message to the websites, etc. But yeah, it was something that there was like a bunch of confusion. I would see frequently comments under our videos about it, and so I figured I would go through and explain how this works. Like I said, I'm correcting accountants on this, which is kind of crazy. But yeah, hopefully that helps and gives you some sense of how, yes, you can genuinely pay 7.5 to, in theory, if you're in agriculture, 4% tax. And I'll maybe cover one last thing here, which is sometimes you'll talk to kind of outdated accountants in Bulgaria who will say, oh, you set up an offshore company and the offshore company pays you dividends and you pay 5% tax. That used to be the way you would do it. When I first went to Bulgaria, the way that you would do it was they had no controlled foreign companies rules, they had no management and control rules. So you'd have a foreign company, the company would make the money, it would just pay you a dividend, you'd pay 5% tax on it. It was pretty reasonable. Unfortunately, the controlled foreign companies, they still don't have management and control rules, but the controlled foreign companies that they brought in under the Anti-Tax Avoidance Directive tend not to work with that anymore. And so now if you were to try and defer that, you'd end up with likely tax, and so it doesn't really work that well. It's kind of an outdated strategy if somebody mentions it to you. So, but you can still do this 7.5 to 6%, and that's pretty reasonable. So anyway, I hope it helps. Let me know if you have comments, and we will see you on the next video.